so we're moving straight into the science of teams. I'd like first to introduce Mr. Phil Temby. Phil is a senior defence scientist who joined the Defence Science and Technology Group in 2002. He holds a Bachelor of Science with first class honours, a Master's degree in psychology and a graduate certificate in scientific leadership. Over his 20-year career, he's worked with various parts of defence, including AHQ, SOCOM, 4Com, JHC, Defence Intelligence Group and CASG. During his early career, he led and conducted human factors assessments in support of various land capability projects, including several large-scale field trials and a secondment to Army headquarters. His research is focused on the use of virtual and live simulation for Army individual and collective training, cognitive assessment and development approaches for Special Forces, and leading research programs with academic and industry partners on tactical decision-making, situational awareness, and team resilience. Phil is currently the Science and Technology Advisor to Headquarters Forces Command, where he provides specialist S&T advice to the command. Today, Phil is presenting on a human performance study focused on team readiness that's currently underway at Headquarters Forces Command. Thank you, Phil.
I see the importance of effective teams. It's not just teams, we need effective teams. And that's probably an easy bit of verbiage, but what is it that makes effective teams? And I'll talk a little bit about that. We certainly know that preparing ready now and future ready teams is clearly a Chief of Army priority and something that sits heavily in the discourse of Headquarters Forces Command discussions. And if you think about Headquarters Forces Command's 4 key priorities around people, preparedness, modernisation and retention, what I'm going to be talking to you about is really around preparedness and new approaches to getting after team readiness. And so that's that modernisation piece I talked to. From the research side of the house, which clearly in my role with DSTG, I have those connections across the ecosystem to our research partners and the universities that DG Tradoc spoke to this morning, really around being able to prepare ready and resilient teams for their missions. So I'm not going to spend too much, this is not a lecture on teams. This slide is really just to give you, I suppose going back to first principles, when we talk about a team, what do we mean? It's essentially 2 or more individuals working together interdependently in their specific roles to achieve specific goals and outcomes. We would call that the mission in the Army context. So that's quite different from groups who might have different missions that they're achieving separately for different outcomes. Wouldn't be a science presentation without some sort of reference to a journal paper. That is, happy to make that available afterwards, but essentially the science of teams and what we know about teams has really been developed through studying military teams in the field, surprisingly. And there's a whole bunch of that research that's been done over many years, at least 60 according to that paper. I want to get now into really the heart of the presentation on this idea of team readiness. So hopefully you can read that. I suppose if we look to the literature, it says that readiness is really being this sort of acute state of preparedness and having a capability to perform those tasks, those roles in the immediate future. Now the immediate future could be literally within the next few minutes. Yeah. Phil, are you prepared to give your presentation? It could be tomorrow. Hey, you've got to give this brief to the commander. Or next week, you're about to deploy on some exercise. So that, the extent to which we bound that time frame is an important piece, but it's generally in that sort of short notice space. But argue that readiness is more than RN compliance, and also the Army training levels that we're achieving on those exercises, which is really important, but it's that capacity for the future performance, the follow-on task. Team readiness, the way that we've conceptualised it in this study with Curtin University in conjunction with Headquarters 4Com is this idea of a function or a balance of recent team performance and the demands that that team has experienced and been exposed to and the resources that they've got to deal with future demands. So what? If we start to have ways to monitor that team's readiness, we can provide commanders with assurance And the assurance piece is what I really liked in Kev's talk around that safety. And I think this is about that assurance that we are good to go. So, why do research in this? What's the gap? What's a requirement for a study that I'm going to be talking about? Well, at the moment, scientifically, there's no available measures that we're using that we've been able to find assist us to measure in near real time the readiness of our teams. And in terms of some sort of capability gap for Army, that potentially leads to reliance on that command leadership management intuition, which has its place, absolutely, not questioning that, but the potential for biases and not thinking through all the considerations, the factors, which may ultimately lead to sub-ultimate decisions in how we employ those resources that we have available to us. Which leads me to the study. So the study with Curtin University, we sat down after they got some funding out of Army headquarters through the Army Research Scheme. Some of you may know about. Competitive process where you put in your proposals against a research question or requirement, and this particular one was related to being ready and resilient. And through that process, we've developed the particular study, which has effectively two objectives or aims. First is really to develop and pilot at a small scale level a tool for routine assessment of the real-time readiness. And I suppose the secondary objective is to get feedback from our participants, what I'll talk about shortly, of that tool's ability to assist them to prepare their team's readiness and functioning in a headquarters 4Com context. So, what did we do? What's the method that we went about to set up and construct the study? Well, as all good researchers do, the university team looked to the literature for guidance around, well, what do we know already about team readiness? And surprisingly, there's not a lot actually written about it. There's lots on teams and team performance and team functioning, and I'll talk to that shortly. But the readiness piece and what we conceptualise that to mean and how we might measure it is actually pretty scarce. So there's some opportunity here. The purpose of doing that is to see what is available, but also to ensure that we've got some coverage and understanding of what we mean by those inputs and ingredients to team readiness. From there, we sat down with Jackie and her team and other HPO stakeholders to say, well, how are we going to execute this study? What do we want to collect? How are we going to do it? And what are the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve over the timeframe of this study, which will be running to the end of this year? We got Commander 4Com's buy-in and support for this. We had to get her endorsement, which she was happy to sign off on, but also go through the usual research ethics approval process to ensure that the methodology is all appropriate. So one of the unique things we did is say, well, if we don't have all the answers right now about team readiness, get the wisdom of the crowds. Let's also sit down with the sample that we're going to run the study with, which was the principal staff officers in headquarters 4Com, including the two one-stars who were here this morning with us, to say, okay, tell us more about the unique nature of working in a headquarters environment. What are the work demands? What are the contextual factors that contribute to your day-to-day work, and also how you measure the performance of your teams? That was really important to understand that context, but also to understand, well, what might be some unique user requirements as we develop this measurement tool, and to think about any constraints of being able to do that. From there, I'm sort of jumping through it. The items that we came up with, which I'll show you shortly, were able to be developed up front and then socialised with that PSO sample. And we created that in Survey Manager, which some of you may be familiar with, and completed surveys online through that Defence endorsed tool. Again, wouldn't be a science presentation without some conceptual models. Hopefully you'll see that some of the variables or the input factors align with some of the messaging you heard this morning around trust, psychological safety. So the prevailing model in the literature around teams and team performance is really about this inputs, process or mediators, outputs model. Essentially it says, the inputs are the things that individual team members bring to the team up front, okay? So that's their knowledge, skills and ability, their experience, hopefully they've got it, Kev, before they bring it to the team. Obviously, at a team level, it's the leadership that might also be brought into the team, the number of people you have in your team, the complexity of the tasks that they're expected to perform, through to organisational level factors, including different resources, structures and ways of working, which in a hierarchical organisation like Army and the ADF, clearly those things already exist. So then you think about jumping to the outputs. Typically, performance is measured in terms of the quality of the work and the outputs that are produced. Often in a headquarters environment could be briefs and products that socialise up to and out, and the qualityness and timeliness of being able to produce those. But also the innovations that occur through that, different ways of thinking and producing outcomes that are going to achieve the broader mission. It's really important also to be thinking about the viability. So if you think about readiness as being ready to perform the next, it's no good if you complete that and you're exhausted at the end of it, right? You need to have that viability still in the tank to be able to maintain the health and well-being of your team members. And there's a level of satisfaction that you're getting after those things. There's that engagement that's been talked about this morning, and the satisfaction that you're contributing to something bigger than yourself as a team member within a team. The conversion of the inputs to outputs are really impacted by or converted to outputs through these different mediators. So the extent to which members of a team have that team orientation, you're on the same page, you're all getting after the same mission, you've got the trust within each other, you're able to adapt when different adversities strike, you're coordinating your effort, you're planning, you're allocating tasks, roles, responsibility through to how you might manage differences of opinion or conflict within the team, through to your planning and problem solving, working your way through. Clearly, effective communication, as we saw from a great example this morning, is critical to teams. And this idea of shared mental models, which is a fancy way of saying being on the same page, or we might say all being on net, right? So that's a quick sort of rundown of sort of team performance model, but then we said, well, that's probably not enough. That's not giving us enough to talk more about readiness. We need to understand these demands and resources more effectively. So we turned to the literature again, and many of you may be familiar with the job demands resources model, which has been well validated, and it's used to populate aspects of the voice survey, which you probably all complete on an annual basis. Demands are those things that obviously are things like maintain that work-life balance, the role clarity that you have in your teams, the equipment that's available, the time pressure, the temporal component we talked about, through to the resources which enable you to achieve the mission. So that's that communication, the safety, the teamwork and the leadership. So clearly overlap, but thought I'd spend a bit of time talking about that in detail. So again, lots of words on the screen. Not expected to read all those, but they are the items that we generate for the measure. And our working model, or formula if you like, for how we're going to talk about measuring team readiness is all relative to a particular time frame. So if you say, well, how ready are you right now? Well, it's probably based on my recent performance. I think about that. So it's a change, those triangles equal change from a time period 1 to time period 2, and that could be just a couple of days, a couple of hours, through to the changes in available resources for your team, through to taking away the demands. Now, that's just a very simple formula, if you think about it. Each of these items may have different levels of importance or priority attached to them. So one of the things we're going to explore in the study is actually how you might weight those items differently and get feedback to see what impact those things then have on effectively scoring team readiness. So we're right in the midst of the implementation phase at the moment. So in terms of data, I don't really have much to sort of share at this stage, except that rolling this out on a fortnightly basis through survey managers been pretty straightforward. We've had really good buy-in from the PSOs to support this, where the PSOs will rate their team members on those different items on a 0 to 100% scale, and it's less than 5 minutes to complete. Once they know what to do. One of the things we're also getting to do is to commit to action. So accountability is really important in teams, for high performance teams, around how we think about what is it that we're going to take action on to maintain readiness. So we've got them committing, what is I'm going to commit to as an activity or an action to intervene and support my team, maintain my team readiness. We're going to calculate the team readiness scores in that tool, and one of the things we want to do is produce a product. So it's not just about filling in an online survey. Okay, so we ticked a box there, but so what? We need some sort of product. And Army loves its placemats. So again, not expected to see read all the detail. This is a working template of what could potentially be produced as a dashboard. So it's got each of the items, but also you can see how over time the scores that are inputted versus along those 3 dimensions of performance, demands and resources could be used. So clearly traffic light approach is good to be thinking about risk levels, and so team readiness thinking about it in terms of, is your team under pressure to maintain its readiness? Is it striving to maintain that readiness at the sort of in the amber state, or is it moving? Is it staying in green around? We're good to go, basically. So we're basically going to provide this to the PSOs very shortly and get their feedback on its fitness for purpose, right? So because we're co-designing the product with our PSOs, we want to see the utility of this type of product and how it could then be used to support the conversations in the team, but also its utility moving forward. So that leads me to the opportunities. So I've got a couple more slides and I'll open up for questions. We like the language of conditions check. It's our sort of working definition at the moment around why you would use this type of tool. So again, thinking about the Team Sky analogy, 1%ers, most of this stuff, hopefully, that we've been talking about is fairly intuitive to you and go, hey Phil, we've heard a lot of these terms before. We've lived in teams all our life in Army. There's a maturity of work and development that's done in Army. What are you telling us that's new? It's more about using these types of tools to have the conversation, to do that pulse check, to support perhaps a team review. So it's not about, it's being honest, transparent with our data. So team leaders not going, hey, this is my team, and I'm not going to share that with you, but open up the conversation to say, here's areas that we might want to continue to sustain, improve, or we fix. Hey, the work-life balance here is not great. What are we going to do about it? Our trending's suggesting that it's going in the wrong direction. So we can have more data-informed conversations. Okay? We can also utilise a tool like that to be talking about, particularly maybe for more junior leaders, we're piloting it in a PSO sample, but it could be scaled out to other teams. Using it for coaching purposes, okay? Supporting the conversation, okay, providing that feedback. How would you go about doing that? And monitoring those trends over time is what we see is probably the real value. And informing when you want to then, if you need to, pull that relief valve to say, we need a period of active recovery here. And we've just done that in headquarters Falcon. Same, hey, we're good to go, let's double down. We can squeeze a little bit more out of the fruit here. Okay, getting towards the end. So really what we've been doing in this study, and hopefully it's come across less as a study as well, that's also the trick, is looking at a new approach to augment our understanding of team readiness as it exists in the ADF at the moment, and the Army, around, hey, it's not just ARN, it's not just about training levels, it's a tool to support that monitoring in a way that is quick and user-friendly. We can dashboard it, we can have those conversations, and we haven't just gone, hey, this is our best guess of those items. We've looked at the science, we've looked at the literature, what are those key factors that contribute to team readiness, our best guess at the moment. And a lot of the work that I get to be involved with, and it was mentioned by the DG this morning around DSTG's contribution to research, is often thinking out into the next horizon. This is an example at the first epoch, the time in creation, force in being, horizon 1, we're saying we can do the translation as we go here. This is an example where we've pulled together this tool reasonably quickly and roll it out to support, to get a quick download to see if it's got utility. If not, we go back to the drawing board. That was really key to communicating the value proposition for particularly the commander and all those who were engaged early on in this space of, hey, is this the type of tool or product that could be useful to what you already have? And the answer to that was yes, but it was important to say that or get that across, and it wasn't just, hey, we just want to collect some data and we're going to do some analysis on it. It's got to be more than that if it's applied. We see that the potential here, and it's echoing Mam's comments this morning about the future potential to provide commanders with that assurance that their teams are ready to go. So this information can be aggregated up as well, so not just sitting in a branch level. And one thing that high performance organisations do, and we see it in elite sport, and I know the differences between army and elite sport are always made, but nevertheless, bear with me. The high performance organisations, and the industry does really well, is that they poll their people regularly. Now, you got to get the balance right of survey fatigue and that engagement, but the annual climate survey is one approach to getting that feedback from people going, hey, we feeling burnout, what are our resources, what are our demands? And then that goes through a cycle of reflection and feedback, and then you get after it. You try to make change, but if you're doing it more frequently, it becomes part of business as usual, it can seem less daunting, okay? And it makes it easier to have those conversations in the teams as well if you've got tools to support it. So, wrapping up, next steps we're going to finalise data collection. We've got another round of collecting to go, and that's probably in a fortnight's time. We're going to get the feedback from the PSIs as part of this initial pilot phase, thinking about how they would utilise that in their work environment and the feedback on that dashboard as well. And then we're going to report the outcomes to the headquarters, and particularly the commander's interested in getting a back brief. That's probably going to be October at this stage. And then we can open up and say, well, are others interested in utilising this? You know, getting some feedback and validation in other contexts for follow-on purposes. Ladies and gents, probably not your usual science presentation, but hopefully give you that wave top of a view, but a bit of detail on the conceptual models and approach that we're talking about here. Really interested to have conversations in the breaks, but if you've got time now for one question, happy to take that.
When we talk about resources and you're doing it at headquarters or comms, do you think it'll change when you get down to, say, a battle group level or a combat team where a resource is no longer information but physical resource of vehicles, weapons, ammunition? Do you think that'll change much of it for you?
Great question. Absolutely, mate. So what hopefully you might see here from this list, you know, we're talking about access to key equipment. One of the things we can do is tailor this to other formations, units and contexts to say, well, what do we mean by key resources in that space? So these are quite generic if you think about it, but they work sufficiently based on the data we've got at this stage to be workable. So short answer, yes, we think it can be applied into other contexts and tailored to your needs, whilst maintaining the integrity of each of the items that are in there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thanks, mate. I think that's all we've got time for now. I think we're going to hand over to the next presenter. Hey, ladies and gents, thanks again. Look forward to having the conversations in the margin. Thank you.
Our next speaker from DSTG is Dr. Kurt Moody. Kurt completed a Bachelor of Sports and Exercise Science with honours in 2012, a PhD in Biomechanics in 2017, and a 2-year postdoctoral research fellowship in 2018 as part of the Program in Assistive Technology Innovation. That is a great acronym, PADI. Kurt joined Defence Science and Technology Group in 2018 as a biomechanist and led the Assistive Technology and Flight Recorder research programs, working collaboratively between military stakeholders, universities and industry. In 2022, Kurt transferred to the DSTG Human Performance Science and Technology Advisor role, embedded at ADF-SSO and 4Com, where he captures human performance S&T needs, provides up-to-date S&T advice and facilitates S&T engagement activities in direct support of the units. Kurt will present a study to us today on team dynamics. Welcome, Kurt.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks everyone for coming along and listening in. I think Phil did a really great job sort of leading in to the science of teams and giving that overarching view of the type of research and work that's happening at DST and in the broader sort of team space. What I'll focus into it is a more singular project, so a project we've been doing with a university partner as part of our larger human performance research network, so HPO. So up front, essentially what this project was trying to do is see whether it's possible to translate GPS-based metrics that are more commonly used in an elite sporting environment into a small military team setting. Now we know that pushing stuff from sport into military doesn't always work and shouldn't always work. So what we want to try and do is we'll understand, is there an opportunity to bring some of those outcomes across and be able to use them to quantify the performance of a team. And the reason this project stood up was more often than not within the HP and HPO space, we focus on the individual. We utilise the PTIs to enhance the physical capabilities of the members, and our psychs to enhance the mental capabilities and resilience of our members as well. But we don't necessarily know how much that impacts the small team environment or the larger team environment as well. We don't have the means to effectively quantify that. And that's where this project has sort of spun up. Now, in terms of who's running this, obviously it's a DST funded project in partnership with Office of Naval Research Global, so ONR, chipped in funding, and University of Technology Sydney is taking the lead on this project. So they're the sort of brains behind it, and I'm just sitting here trying to steal a little bit of the thunder. So bear with me if I miss any of the key points. We've had some great support from the School of Infantry in terms of capturing some data up at Singleton, and as well as Forces Command and Army Headquarters for providing that top level cover and advice to guide us forward in terms of that. The overall outcome, or the product that we want to try to achieve at the end of this, which it was meant to be a short 2-year project, and it's now rolled into about 1,000 years because it started just as COVID kicked off and everything hit the brakes. But the outcome for this project is to try and develop a way, or a valid way, to measure or objectively measure team performance within a military environment. Now, whilst we'll just be focusing in more the physical and spacing environment, it still gives us a way to sort of move forward. And this can be used to supplement things such as after action reviews, or provide a little training tool prior to the activities being conducted. So what did we do? So as I mentioned, we've been up at Singleton a few times, and we've been able to interject into their IETs, and in particular their offensive operations week or off-ops week. We've collected a number of different serials where the trainees have procedurally completed a week's worth of training in conducting a small team's section attack of approximately 12 guys with a section commander as well, 12 members with a section commander. And they'll conduct this serial over about a 2-hour period. They'll do a patrol, they'll get engaged by an enemy force, they'll complete a section attack as part of their team led by their section commander. They'll finish that, wrap up that attack, the fight through, and then continue to patrol out and come back, where they'll be engaged by an ambush, and they'll have to conduct a counter-offensive to then overcome and then return back to base. And they're assessed on that to complete their offensive ops week and make sure that they're safe in conducting those small teams environments. These are conducted with blanks, so they're not using live munitions as part of this training, but it leads into going down, and in the next weeks after that, they then move into that more live scenario. What we've done is we've placed GPS units, just the exact same ones you would see on the athletes where they wear the good old sports bras. They sit just up on the upper leg, and we've used 2 different types of GPS devices. Your commercial off-the-shelf products, so Catapult, you're probably familiar with it, and we've also used a DST developed device, the Flight Recorder, a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, but tries to add a little bit more capability. So these graphs are just of the GPS devices where we've got them onto all 12 members of the team. You can see, maybe not, it's a bit hard to see, but the 2 I see, the gunner and rifleman, are in different stars, and then the rest of the circles and the different colours represent the 3 different fire teams within this particular section attack. So the section commanders had flexibility in terms of how they were conducting that assault. Some members used a three fire teams. Other groups used 2 different fire teams and conducted that section attack. So there is quite a fair bit of variability. We placed the GPS units, and we just trialled along as they sort of moved through. We tried to take notes down of what was happening throughout each one of those scenarios, so we could, illustrate and draw back what they did, the timings of those activities, and how the members moved throughout those different engagements. So from there, we're able to label it. So we've got a little pre-attack in the blue here, the section attack being conducted, fight through, and then that sort of regrouping phase. So we've focused on just the 7 serials that we've conducted so far, and what I've got graphed up is up the top, one of the serials where they failed, and then when they were made to repeat it, and then they passed through there, which is great. We'd love to see a little bit of a fail. Probably not for the dudes, because it was 2 hours, 3 hours of fun, and then they had to repeat it, but gave us quite a rich data set. So bear with us as we still work through this, as sort of Phil was articulating. His project is still within the data collection phase, and we're in a similar space. But what we've been able to do is to start putting this GPS data in, we map it on a grid and start looking at how those individuals are moving, and look at how those individuals move relative to one another, both within their fire team and across a broader 12-man section attack. And we pull out a couple of key variables. These variables we sort of pulled out based on what's been used in the sporting environment, and with some engagement with the SMEs over at School of Infantry. So we had some initial engagement with the CO, some engagements with the OCs there, and also the guys on the ground running the training to get an idea of, do we think these metrics are going to give us a little bit of insight? As we churn through this data and look to capture a little bit more, we'll provide another back brief. We've recently done one, and we'll look to return that back brief again after a bit more data collection and say, what do you think of these variables? These are a few things we've found. These are some differences we've found. So sticking to this example, we've got up the top, fail, down the bottom, pass. Unfortunately, within this serial, we didn't have any GPS devices on the enemy force. Up the top serial, they're about here, and the other serial, they're about here. There's two different ones. Pardon me. Some of the key differences we noticed, and probably no shit Sherlock, was the speed of the attack between the failure and the success. And some of the feedback from the assessor was there was no urgency from the first group. And you can look at when this restarts, how slow they were once they got engaged in terms of creating that extended line. They were also quite spread out at different bits of time as well, and they were unable to maintain what we've got, different linearities of the line, so a relatively straight line or an extended line as they move forward and advance. They were sort of all over the place, increasing risk of fratricide. They weren't really getting at their target, and they were moving quite slowly. They also didn't occupy as much space as the successful, they occupied much more space than the successful section attack, and they did it much slower. There's the one down here, once it restarts, you'll see they managed to group up into that clear extended line a lot quicker and start moving forward to capture those enemy pits at a faster rate as well. The other things we're trying to look at is the synchrony between the fire teams. Obviously, you'll try and have one member providing suppressive fire, another member will advance up to a safe space, and then they'll alternate as they move forward. So we're looking at how those individual fire teams will move up in a synchronous or asynchronous manner, the spacing between those groups, their rate of movement as they try and capture those different enemy pits, and what they do when they fight through as well. So that's some of the initial data that we've captured from there. So what have we learnt so far? We know that now that we can capture section attack data using these spatial metrics from the GPS coordinates, and we're starting to see some subtle differences between different sections, both just people completing a different serial, but also the same section completing the same serial as well. So there is a bit of variance in there, but we're starting to pull out some metrics that are indicating potentially successful or unsuccessful performance. Now, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. It's still quite a small subset of data, but we're getting a list of initial metrics to look at, the length, the width of the fire teams, the synchrony, whether they're moving synchronous or asynchronous as they provide that suppressive fire, and also the total surface area of that section attack as well. There are differences between those different sections and also between the quality of performance, but we want to try and dive into that a little bit deeper. Obviously, the IETs are still quite new to this. They've done a fair bit of training in the weeks or two prior as they progress and move up towards this serial. But we're interested in looking at other more experienced teams that will be conducting a section attack drill, such as the Duke of Gloucester Cup, and seeing how they move as a team and how they execute that task. As I mentioned, we know that they are highly variable. This could be due to the environment. This could be due to the enemy that you're fighting through, the location of the trees, open bush, dense bush. But by being able to capture a bit more data, it's likely that we'll be able to see some underlying behaviours that are consistent between a successful and unsuccessful performance, and gives you a little bit of an understanding of some of those key features that we could use to coach teams or groups in terms of conducting those attacks. So what does this mean? What's the end outcome? At the moment, we're learning that obviously team behaviour can be measured in a variety of contexts. And again, as I was mentioned before, it allows us to start looking at the performance of a team. Whilst we train individually, we do also train in a team, and we can only work as fast as our slowest member. So we need to make sure we have an understanding of how the team's operating, and if we're introducing new capabilities, how that impacts the performance of a team. So this can then enable investigations into how different constraints, different independent variables affect the outcome of a team. So someone mentioned before a really high rotation on TS in terms of the members coming in and members coming out. It's not always a like for like when we're swapping members out. So how does that impact the performance of a team in a small team's environment in a more critical section attack scenario? So we could look at how that team's impacted. We can understand how teams operate in different environments, different weather conditions. But also once we start introducing new pieces of kit, new pieces of technology, let's add in an autonomous system, whether it's a drone or a mule behind us. How does that impact the performance of the team? Whilst you might not be having to carry as much kit, does it get in the way? Does it interrupt how you're meant to be executing that task? If you have a heads-up display providing feedback on location, weapon systems, are you then overloaded by too much information and impacts how that team then conducts that task? We can be too focused on enhancing an individual capability and potentially lose sight on the bigger team performance that we really want to provide an impact on. We can make an individual fitter, faster, stronger, and more resilient, but is that having a true impact on our team, or can we quantify that and make sure that we're having the greatest impact or effect where it matters? In terms of the potential long-term outcomes, similar to what CTC do, they've got obviously a really nice GPS data set. Our visualization tool is quite rudimentary, sitting on a cheeky Google Maps footage that we clipped off. But long-term, if you're able to roll out this piece of equipment, you could use it and provide quite a quick turnaround to provide some objective data to support an after-action review. So rather than being solely reliant on subjective feedback, you can start to interject that objective data as well to support those reviews. Clearly, the after-action reviews are effective and they work. They've been done for ages. Maybe this could be a tool to help supplement that. Or in particular, in certain areas where deeper feedback would be required, such as the team that failed, you can then throw this on top. Some learners are better visual learners than they are listeners, to enhance how they've responded and then learning to follow on from that. In the short term, what we're looking at doing is collating a library of all the section attacks or all those 2-hour serials that we've been capturing and providing those back as labelled videos to School of Infantry where they've seen some potential value in using that as part of their off-ops weeks for training the guys into it and showing examples, but also the week prior where they conduct a theory week. They'll do a bunch of drawings on a whiteboard because we love whiteboards. They're effective and they're there. But this could be another tool that you could plug in and say, well, look, this is what some of your previous IETs have done. This is an example of a good section attack. Watch this. This is what they did well. Here's the spacing in this environment. Obviously, that can vary a lot as they work through it, but it can be another tool to be used to support those theory weeks training into it. So that's something we're looking at providing back to School of Inf in the coming weeks. And lastly, by being able to measure the cooperative behaviours of our teams, it takes us a step closer to them being able to design specific training tools and training interventions to improve performance as a team. Obviously, Army is really good at training teams. Are there other ways that we can interject and support the implementation of that? And by understanding how our teams work, what they do well, what they don't do well, we can then develop more targeted interventions to support that. And that's all I've got. Thanks for listening in, I really appreciate it. Some of those metrics we pulled out, we're still in the phase where we're sort of learning and going through it. So if anyone has ideas, suggestions, lob them up to me. Very, very open to hearing any thoughts you might have, or pull me aside at the end, tell me what we've done's crap and tell me some great ideas, because really keen to see what we can do in this space and take advantage of the wealth of wisdom of all the members in the room. So thanks for listening.